So welcome to this special interview to celebrate the republication of Women in Desire Beyond Wanting to Be Wanted that is being reissued this February 2023 as a part of a collection of Jungian classics. And that collection is edited by Stefano Carpani, and it's published by the Chiron Press. And so I wrote this book, Women and Desire Beyond Wanting to Be Wanted, in 1998. And it came out in 1999. And as it turned out at that moment, it wasn't read much by American women, but it was translated into 16 languages, the most translations of any of my books. And it's sold in large numbers in Europe, particularly in Germany, and I think also in Spain. So something was going on in other countries that wasn't going on in America. And I think what was happening at the time was that women in America were sort of moving on with their lives, but they didn't like the F word, the word feminism. They didn't want to be associated with it. So it seemed to me at that moment in time that the freedoms that had been won through the hard work of a lot of women, particularly the mothers and grandmothers of the young women of that moment, had in some ways been lost. And there might be even a misunderstanding of how to make a whole and good life now that women had these freedoms. It seemed as though back then that women felt that their choices needed to be whether they stayed at home full-time with their kids or what they would do in regard to the way they looked, whether they would work out of the gym or not. And there were a lot of concerns about eating disorders in the late 90s as they were really coming into the kind of cultural framework. So back then it seemed to me that maybe women were missing the point about being able to have a new kind of life, a life that included much more than the typical roles of women over time of being mothers, daughters, grandmothers, aunts, and so on, and taking care of others. And now could include those roles, but also could include these other adventures in life in which we would move out and take control of the world, basically, of the things that were available to us. So things didn't happen in that way in the late 90s, the early 2000s. And it really wasn't really until just about the Me Too movement in these recent years, in reaction to Donald Trump, really, and maybe in reaction to other kinds of cultural moments, that women, young women especially, began to claim to be feminists and to be interested in looking at their lives in a different way. And that has gone forward with a new kind of feminism, I would say. But in a certain way, this new feminism doesn't include the mothers and grandmothers who worked on the old feminism. So I don't find my generation much included in the conferences, the conversations that are going on with young women. I don't hear my advice, being sought by really my daughter, her friends, or their friends. The younger group, I would say that younger even than my children, or the young women who are in college and graduate school now. Certainly those women do seek my advice, but not typically about women's development, more about relationships. So today I'm going to be exploring the subjects that are in the book, Women in Desire, with my wonderful friend and colleague, Katherine Woodward Thomas, who has helped thousands of women find their way through the thickets of relationships. Katherine Woodward Thomas, MA-MFT, is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Conscious Uncoupling, 5 Steps to Living Happily Even After, which was nominated for a Books for a Better Life Award and for the national bestseller Calling in the One, 7 Weeks to Attract the Love of Your Life. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist and a teacher to thousands from all over the world in her virtual and in-person learning classes. I asked Katherine to write the foreword to the book, to this new edition of Women in Desire, because I felt that she has her finger on the pulse of what's happening with women who are uncoupling and then maybe trying to recouple. And I've also witnessed her working with women reclaiming their power after trauma, after difficulty, being able to come into a new life without kind of overdoing the victim side of things. So today, Katherine and I are going to talk about building new models and new paradigms that would be based on the integrity of our own being, instead of looking to others to approve us, to desire us. And this is the thing that I still find women are trapped in, which is wanting the approval, wanting the endorsement, or wanting the desire from someone else in order to feel that they're confident about what they're doing. So welcome, Katherine.
Oh, Polly, it's always such a joy to be with you. And I love that we're here talking about this book, because this book is fabulous. It is transformative. The distinctions that you are making are so clear and so necessary for where we are collectively in our development.
Well, thank you. Thank
You were a
you.
little ahead of your time, I think.
Yeah, I have that problem. And I didn't think in the past that it was a problem. And now I know it's a problem. If you're ahead of the time, it never catches up with you, but maybe at this moment it will to some extent. So I wonder what you think about this moment where we are right now in terms of female development, in terms of women's lives, in terms of our relationships. Like, what do you see on the horizon?
I think we're a little caught in the birth canal. I mean, that's what you're talking about. We've definitely made amazing progress, but we have a tendency to, look, there's a long way to go even with the external glass ceilings, but we have obviously different lives than women had 50 years ago, 60 years ago. I've been watching Mad Men.
Oh, yeah.
First time I somehow missed it when it first came around.
Mm-hmm.
It churns my stomach. It's such an accurate description, a good reminder of where we're coming from and what our mothers and grandmothers and we're up against. But that said, I think you're right. We kind of thought, okay, I'm done with that, done deal. But what we're really confronted with now are the inner glass ceilings.
Yeah, exactly.
Inner glass ceilings. I don't want to threaten other women by being too good. I'm valuing myself according to the number on the morning scale and what somebody else says that I should look like. My life is lit up by someone desiring me, and I'm more connected to whether they're desiring me than whether I even desire them back. So, we deal with relationship a lot, and what I see for many of us, we're getting into relationship because somebody else desires us and we get euphoric with that desire. And we haven't assessed the character of that person. We're not sure that we're even compatible. We're not even sure that we like that person. And we'll get really entangled up in their desire for us. So I think what you're pointing to is just gorgeous and just right spot on as we are finally waking up in the aftermath of, pussy hats and, the Me Too movement, which opened that conversation wide up, made it relevant to our lives. And this is where we need to go next, is what you're pointing to.
I wonder if we can just spend a moment talking about appearance, because in the book, I have a chapter called Through the Looking Glass. And of course, I'm thinking of Alice in Wonderland, and I'm thinking also of just the way that women evaluate themselves, their power still, in terms of appearance. And sometimes I think about the fact that, you know, before there were photographs, before there were glass plate windows, you know, and of course, before there were mirrors, but in some ways now the cell phones with all the pictures on them make up for any mirror. But before all of this, which wasn't that long ago, women were not looking at themselves all the time. You know, they were having experiences in their lives, but it wasn't an experience about how I look. And I even know myself when I'm on Zoom like this, I look at myself. And one of the things I don't like about being on Zoom during the day when I am on Zoom is that I have, you know, I have said to myself, I'm only going to put the other person up, but then I check on myself, you know, and I say basically, oh, something's off there. And should I straighten it out? I don't think that way of experiencing ourselves is actually in our favor, but it's so front and center, and it still is, that I don't know sometimes what to say about it even, you know.
And the relationship between that and power.
Of course,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Value and power, how we are valuing. I mean, traditionally, I think we women have valued ourselves for two things. One is how much our looks elicit desire in others, and the other is how much care we give. And both are out here where our primary intention is inside of ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I wrote the book, I did look at the research on the power of appearance in women. And really, the research showed that skinny is powerful, but it's weird. I mean, that has changed a little since Black women have been much more on the map. But, you know, if you are really skinny, and, you know, the few times in my life when I've lost a lot of weight have been when I've been sick. And when I've gotten well, I'd look at the image in the mirror and I'd go like, well, I guess that looks good. But the feelings inside, I was weak. And I could even feel as I got back to my normal weight, a strength coming back. And at that time, I mean, when I wrote the book and really earlier in my life, my mentors, my sort of ideal images were Black women. And particularly, you know, when I was younger, Tina Turner, like a really strong woman who embodies her body. And while she's beautiful, you don't feel that that's what she's about. You feel that she's about her power, that she's about being herself. And of course, there are many. Maya Angelou was another one of my mentors, but there are many Black women who have been out there over the years in their bigger presence, bigger clothes, bigger hats, bigger shoes than white women. And their presence was strong. And so sometimes I think that the skinny is powerful thing kind of bit us, white women, in a way that was really a loss to us. And I think some of that is changing, but because advertising has changed, you know, but still the idea of evaluating yourself by the way you look and feeling that as your power, and then for some years of your life, which might be, say, between 15 and say 35, you might feel that's your biggest power, but that's just at the time when you need to be developing your mind, your career, you know, the things that will last as your power. You've got to develop when you're younger. If you wait till you're 35, honestly, there's a lifespan and you're a little behind the 8 ball. And I do find that with women that I meet in psychotherapy and some women in my trainings, that at 35, they're starting to say, what do I want to be when I grow up? And it's really too late. You know, it's not too late to start, but you're grown up already. So it's a good idea, I think, for women when they're younger to begin to look at their appearance as something that is not core for their power. And I'm afraid that it's still, in this period of time, tends to pull that way for a lot, maybe too many women.
Well, and I think that, we as mothers, have a duty to be conscious about what we're projecting into our daughters too, because certainly, that, I mean, my mother was very, very adamant when I was being raised that I needed to be thin. And as a matter of fact, when I was 14, I gained 10 pounds and she didn't like it. So she informed me that she was no longer going to buy me any clothes because she didn't know what size I wore and she wasn't interested in my size. And, that ended up being a great thing for me because I went out and got a job and started learning that I could take care of myself at a pretty young age. And I have really fond memories of that job. So it ended up working out, but it was also wounding. And I also got the message that got internalized. So I have daughters now, and they're both a little overweight. They struggle with their weight. And I have to very consciously not have that be an issue where I shame them, where I'm supportive of them, but I don't shame them. So I don't pass the shame baton on. But as we're talking about this issue of power, I think if I look at myself and when I'm thinner, the power that I feel is like a power over. Certain power over other people,
Over others,
over men who might desire me. Right, we're talking about women wanting to be wanted, and there's a certain power, like I'm going to want to be wanted. I'm going to manipulate that somehow by how I look, and that's really actually kind of a patriarchal power system to begin with, because I think a more feminine version of power, an organic feminine version of power, which, by the way, if you look in the dictionary, you're only going to see it defined in more masculine terms, which is power over, control, domination. That's how power is defined in the dictionary. But I think a feminine version of power is power with. Power to give life, to breathe life into a situation, the power to generate possibility, the power to create something new. And it's certainly the power to transform, to uplift, to uplevel, but it's a power with, it's a really different power system. And
well, women aren't great at having power with each other. I mean, we might be wanting to empower those that we're trying to help. But it does occur to me, again, from working with women in therapy, and then, I mean, many of the women I see in therapy are women leaders. If they're under a female leader in their work, they tend to like it less than if they're under a male leader. Now, isn't that a surprise? Because we're all hoping that women will be leading, and they are in many institutions now. But when there's a woman who is your boss, unfortunately, you may feel that she wants to control you. And instead of having power with you, collaborating with you, she might be a little on the micromanaging side because she wants things to turn out the way she wants things to turn out. And I think that part of women leading and women having positions of power, we haven't worked that out. We sometimes are leading like we're mothers with a family, like you're going to do it this way, or what are you doing over there in the corner? I mean, or something along the lines of, and to me this is really the worst, having people compete with each other. Like some mothers would have their children compete with each other. Oh, your brother is better at studying biology. Why aren't you studying? That kind of setup, which I think we inherit somewhat from the role of being primed to be mothers, is not sharing power. It's not power with others. It's not collaborating. So this is, again, one of the areas where I think we need to grow as women leaders, especially.
Well, and I think, what you're saying is really beautifully articulate. If you look back to our grandmothers in the 1960s, our mothers and grandmothers, and what they were moving forward, they were standing up that they deserved to be attorneys, to be doctors, to be financially sovereign, to be able to buy homes and all of these things in the external world. And so there was already kind of a power structure in place that was more defined by men.
Yeah.
And I think that we women kind of just needed to, to kind of get in step, and we needed to prove ourselves that we could do that too. So in a way, we kind of stepped into a masculine system of power to gain power.
Mm-hmm.
And so the inquiry into what is a feminine version of power, what is it to actually be the leaders of the world, particularly at this pivotal point in history, is a really critical conversation. Because I think if you really begin to get down to the nuts and bolts of it, it is a different system of power, which is built on a different set of values. And we see kind of the repercussions of what's happening in our world with an imbalanced power system that's only informed by a masculine, make it happen, win at all costs, power over paradigm. So what you're doing in this book, Polly, I think is the foundation of where we need to go, because you're dealing with consciousness. One of the things I love about you, and I'm just in awe of you, truthfully, you're one of the most brilliant women I know. And I really mean that truly, because you don't stop at the surface of things. You go right down to the root. You go right down to the consciousness of things. And what you're doing is you're making us aware of conversations that are so unspoken in the common, even in therapy. Like, nobody's really talking about this. If you look at many of the relationship books that are out now, it's kind of like, how do you get what you want without examining, like, why do you even want that?
Why do you want what you want? Right.
Why do you even want what you want?
Right.
Genuine, authentic want? Like,
Right.
who's telling you?
Right.
That was the best moment I had, really, was when I was getting divorced, and I felt so embarrassed and so ashamed. And here I am, a big relationship teacher, known for calling in the one. And here I am getting divorced. And I had this moment of sanity, I think, where the angels came down from heaven. And I thought, wait a minute, what's thinking me? Whose values are thinking me right now? Do I believe that you should stay together for the rest of your life, or the relationship is a failure, or you're a sham? Well, no, I didn't authentically believe that. So this ability to step back from our own knee-jerk assumptions, our own knee-jerk desires, I want to be wanted, and just say, wait a minute, where does that come from? And is that really aligned with my soul? Is that for the highest and the best of myself and all beings?
Well, the book is rooted in a folk tale that has been told in many ways, but the version that I use of it comes from really the 16th century in England. It happens to exist in writing at Oxford, but I came across it in a collection called Feminist Folktales. And it is the story of the Lady Ragnell and Sir Gawain. It's called The Wedding of Sir Gawain and the Lady Ragnell. And really interestingly, it relates to the period of time when marriage became a law rather than it being a sacrament. So in the early Middle Ages, sort of the 12th to the 15th century in Europe, there were laws about men now owning the women by the women taking their names and owning the children. Previously, marriage had been a sacrament, but this ownership aspect had not been part of it. And again, to think as a woman, you have to think over time. Women have not always been in the situation that they've been in for the last 200 years. You know, we haven't always had mirrors and photographs. We haven't always been absorbed with our appearances. We haven't always belonged to men. Our children didn't always belong to men, etc. And so in this story, there is a question that's being put to King Arthur. It's sort of one of the Knights of the Round Table kind of stories. And the question that's asked of him at the peril of his losing his head is, what is it that women desire above all else? And he has 1 year to find the answer. There's a challenge to him. And so he goes to his finest knight, who is Gawain, who is the kindest and the bravest and the most handsome and the sweetest. He's really this wonderful human being. And he asks Gawain to help him find this answer. And so they go all over the place looking to the wise men to get the answer. And they get a lot of answers, like women want land, they want money, they want jewels, they want, you know, they don't say like 3 days in a spa, but it's like that, you know, it's like, this is what women really want. And then there's this very ugly, very fat, full of warts woman who kind of trundles out of the woods, and she challenges Gawain one day, and she says, you don't have the answer, with a confidence. She just says, you don't have the answer. She says, I know your business, I know what you're doing, and you don't have the answer. And Gawain says, you know, tell us the answer. I'll give you anything you want. I'll give you jewels, I'll give you land, I'll give you 3 days in the spa, just tell us the answer. And she says, none of those things are valuable to me. And he says, well, what do you want? She says, actually, she's talking to Arthur. She's not talking to Gawain. So we're talking now to King Arthur. She says to him, I want to marry the finest knight in England. I want to marry Gawain. And I want you to make this proposal to him. And Arthur says to her, I could never do that. He's his own man. I can't tell him who to marry. And she said, I didn't ask you to tell him who to marry. I want you to tell Gawain what the situation is. And I want him of his own free will to decide to marry me. And if that happens, then I'll tell you the answer. And so the story sort of ensues. He goes back, he tells Gawain. Gawain says, of course I'll marry her because I honor you, the king. I would do anything for you. So, I will go to her and I will tell her, yes. But then Arthur says, having met her because she's so ugly, he says, let's try all the other answers first on this day when the answer becomes critical, because he's meeting this challenge with this guy who's going to chop off his head, who happens to be the stepbrother of the hag of Ragnell. When he goes out to meet the challenge, tries all the other answers, and then just at the moment when the head is about to be chopped off, because he knows the answer, since he's told Ragnell that Gawain will marry her. He says, what women desire above all else is sovereignty. It's the right to govern their own lives. And at that moment, he's saved. And the guy that wants to kill him says, you didn't find that answer on your own. He knows, his name is Sommerjour, like summer day. He knows that it was Ragnell who gave the answer. And the tale goes on from there. And I don't want to tell the whole story, except this is the critical thing. Ragnell then, who looks really ugly, rides back to the castle with Gawain, who's very handsome. And she says at the right point, come and kiss me. And he kisses her and she turns into this beautiful woman. And he says, well, what kind of spell is this? because back at that time, the idea was that there were witches. And if this was a spell, his life might be threatened because he kissed her. Because if you kiss somebody, they can suck your spirit out. And so he's kissed her and he feels this is a spell. And so he says, what kind of spell is this? And she says, you have a choice. You can have me like this during the day when we're out in public. And then at night, I'll be my other self, or I can be this way at night. And when we're out in public, I will be the ugly self. And he immediately kneels down and he says, I cannot choose. It is your choice. And that at that point, she becomes beautiful all the time because he recognizes her sovereignty. It's not that he gives her her sovereignty. He recognizes that he can't make that choice for her. And so that frees her. And the story then, there's a lot to the history of the story, but the story is about the fact that all of us really want our own sovereignty. We want to be free to make our choices, to be the people who we are, and not to be under someone else's control. Mm-hmm. And that is an issue that, everybody struggles with, but I think women especially struggle with because we, number one, want control of a lot of things, including other people, which is really off. That won't work and they will become resentful. But then also, because we want to be objects of desire, we often put ourselves under someone else's dominance because we want that endorsement. We want that person to say, I want you to be beautiful by night, just for me. Or I'd like you to be beautiful by day for the whole world. When actually, that's not the other person. It's like that sense of inner beauty or the beauty of our own being is what comes into being when we have this sense of confidence in our own lives where we don't have to get that endorsement from someone else. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that I think women are wrestling with, understanding. And I do believe we're wrestling still with understanding the legitimacy of it for our female friends and counterparts, that they also need this endorsement of their own sovereignty, of their own ability to be confident, complete, people in their own lives. And I feel women have the capacity to lead with that in mind, but often revert instead to leading in another way, which is somewhat as mothers, the way that we would be trying to keep our children safe or trying to make the budget work out for the family. But we're not mothers in the workplace, and the people around us are not children. Mm-hmm. They're grown-ups, and they need to be coming into their own strengths and their own abilities under our leadership and our guidance, not in spite of it, So the story to me imbues the whole book because you can think about it in regard to appearance, you can think about it in regard to leadership, you can think about it in regard to also making choices about being whatever you want to be in your life. If you want to be a mother, if you want to be a leader, if you want to be a carpenter, or you want to be a race car driver, those desires are coming somehow from your specific individuality, not from what other people want you to be, and this medieval story sort of has it all, but we still haven't really followed. And when I say we here, I mean, both men and women, but especially women, because the story is told about women and about their sovereignty. And it has this whole thing in it about this woman who is very ugly and very confident,
Mhm.
and really capable.
I got chills when she said, when you were talking about her saying, we want sovereignty, and I just got head to toe chills.
Yeah.
It's beautifully said. And I think what you're talking about is this ability to be, to self-determine our own lives and the path that we're called to take from a deeply soulful place, which means that we have to develop the capacity to turn inward and to recognize that we are not necessarily who others are projecting us to be or who others are needing us to be. And while we appreciate and honor our relationships, that we are not beholden to anyone to become who they want and need us to be, that our lives belong to us.
Right, right. And I want to be very quick to say, I think many of us do want to take care of others, but we have to realize that if I want to take care of you, of my children, of my partner, I have to claim that as my desire, not you making me do that, needing me to do that, keeping me under your control. No, if I'm bringing you that bowl of soup, that's my desire. That's not you needing a bowl of soup. If I want to walk out and not give you the bowl of soup, that's my desire. If I bring you the bowl of soup, that's my desire. That's not yours. And so, recognizing that the desire comes from our subjectivity, not from somebody else's command or need.
Well, this is what I so appreciate. One of the things I appreciate about your work is how you really help women to grow into their own autonomy.
Yeah.
That is, Ken Wilber calls that the leading edge of women's development. And I would actually agree with him on that. So you give us permission, you give us pause, you give us direction. I probably the book I recommended before this one has been re-released the most, I might start recommending this one the most, but is Love Between Equals.
Yeah, my other book.
Because the desire that most women have is for a relationship, but it's a very different relationship than the relationship they had modeled for them in the homes they were growing up in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very often they saw women subjugating their own needs to please others, to serve others. There's this hunger that is kind of emerging collectively in all of us for for relationships with people who are both holding power, for two people in the room, not just one person taking up all the space with the other person being the support person. And so the kind of evolutionary call that we all have now is to develop this quality of autonomy. What's happening inside of me? And how do I speak to that? How do I address that? And how is that separate from what others are projecting onto me? And it requires that instead of this typical valuing ourselves because of the projections or the desires coming at us, or if we're caregiving properly, which is all out here, you're pointing our attention to what's happening inside of me.
Right, right. And to recognizing also that this word autonomy has gotten sort of a bad rap by some of the relationalists, actually, because they've somehow decided to identify it as individualism or independence. And it really means self-governance, autonomy. It's governing your own life, exactly what is in the story of Sir Gawain and Lady Ragnell. is that you have sovereignty over your life. And honestly, that produces more vulnerability than in many ways submissiveness, because submissiveness, you at least, you kind of know what you're doing. You get into a routine. When you stick your neck out with your own desires, when you say, no, I'm not going to bring that bowl of soup, somebody else can say, well, you're an asshole, or I'm not going to talk to you anymore. And then what do? Then you have to be right now. Then you have to be confident. I know what I'm doing. I'm sticking with it because I know myself. And that is very difficult for everybody, but especially for women. And again, I think many of us, and this is not true for me, but it's true for a lot of women I see in therapy, grew up in an environment where they avoided conflict. And they grew up that way, in part at least, because maybe their mothers did not have conflict openly with the father or with anyone else. And without conflict, we cannot, first of all, be honest. And secondly, we can't be autonomous. It's like, if you're going to guide your own life, you have to have conflict with others. And the best kind of conflict is when you can speak for yourself, you can listen accurately to others and remain curious. And then you don't have to do what the other person is saying, but you can find out what the other person thinks and feels. And then you can make your own decision. And many times women go around conflict. Either they avoid it and then don't handle the conflicts they have with other women. And this, to me, is one of the aspects of, I read a piece that might have been in the Journal of Higher Education about toxic femininity. I'm not sure I like the label of toxic masculinity, but anyway, this is called toxic femininity, which is women talking about other women behind their backs in the workplace. It's called reputation ruining. So instead of dealing with the conflict directly, you go behind someone's back and you ruin their reputation, and they don't know that's happening. And so there's no direct, involvement of trying to find out what is the issue, what's going on, how can we work with our differences. And, once you know what your differences are, you may not be able to find a resolution, but you will know more about what you want yourself. Like, if I have a conflict with you and I find out what your thinking is and what my thinking is, then I can decide, what do I want to do? But if I just react to you, avoid you, talk to you behind your back, what I'm doing is that I'm sowing seeds of hostility between us, even though I'm not sounding like I'm doing that. I can sound like I'm being nice, like I'm going along with things, but behind your back, I do things to you. Eventually, it will come round to, you will hear about it from someone else. So that idea of autonomy ties back to the issue of, when you say what you want, other people are not going to approve it. And so what? You stick with it. You work with what the other people think. You decide what you want. You go back and forth because you're a grown-up, because you're not a child. And you find out then what you want to do. But the idea that the world is going to meet you halfway, oh no, mostly it's not going to meet you halfway.
No, and I think if we allow culture to define our wants, what ends up happening is we end up creating that life and then feeling kind of betrayed by
Yes.
the life that we've created, which is an inauthentic life.
Yes, exactly. Oh, I love that word, inauthentic, because that's the word, that's basically the life without sovereignty. That's the life without autonomy, because that sovereignty and the autonomy, that comes from your own desires and taking your desires forward may or may not work out, but you will gain confidence. Even if they don't work out, you will gain confidence because you will know yourself. And the more you know yourself, the easier
a
it is.
lot of times we don't want our bigness to make other women feel small. So we have this game that we play where we collapse in and pretend to be less than who we are, which keeps everybody small, as opposed to step into being who we really are, which then would model and give permission to other women. You used the word endorsement before, to endorse other women.
Mhm.
I love that. And I really want to point out that that's like a way, because I think this is one of the ways that we're going to collectively move forward is to what I call sponsor each other.
Mhm.
Sponsor each other's greatness, to celebrate each other's bigness,
Mhm.
to celebrate each other's big dreams, and to get up underneath each other. I'm a big fan of Stephen Gilligan, who wrote The Courage to Love. He's a wonderful therapist. And in that book, he talks about how so many of us are living under, all these childhood wounds that our esteem was wounded, where we were not sponsored because we were raised by people who weren't sponsored themselves, whose bigness was not endorsed. And he calls that a curse.
Mm.
And he talks about the need for sponsorship, that we need to, number one, sponsor ourselves, and number two, sponsor each other.
Well, it's interesting that you say curse because, again, in the story of Gawain and Ragnell, Ragnell was under a curse. And it was Merlin, who was her, I think, half brother, who put her under this curse because she was unwomanly and because she did not accept the rules of, over her life for her person or her property. And so because of that, the curse was that she would remain in this ugly form until the greatest knight in Britain willingly agreed to marry her. And so she set it up so that that would happen. But then at the moment when Gawain she sets it up, she's confident, but then when they're in the room together, she does test him to find out if he is authentic. And when she puts the test to him, he says, I can't make that choice for you. That's your choice. Only you can make it. And that frees her. I mean, what I find so remarkable about the story, and it fits with any curse you want to think about, is that it's by her own confidence. It's nothing else. She steps out of the woods. She says, I know the answer. She confronts the king. Then she goes back to the castle, does the wedding dinner looking awful. She looks terrible. People say, well, she must have a lot of money. That's why he must be marrying her, and then they get back to the room and she says, come and kiss me, because she knows that he's going to be tested by the kiss. And then she gives him the final test. But all along, she's in control, and it might not work out. I mean, it could have worked out otherwise. And in some of the versions of the story, he does make the choice. And so it doesn't work out and it's a failure. But, it's so when you're under a curse, it's like you have to begin to work your own way out of it. It is not that someone else can lift that curse at that point. It's like you have to figure out your path. And earlier, when you were talking about your mother, I just wanted to say that, in some ways, it was a blessing that my mother looked a little bit like the Lady Ragnell. I mean, she was fat, I guess, by today's standards. She was heavy, she was big, she looked like Golda Meir. She had a large nose, she was bosomy. And because she was Slovenian, she didn't shave her legs, she didn't shave under her arms. And she dressed in this manner that for me as a child, I was embarrassed by, because she didn't look like the other mothers, and we weren't living really close to her family. We were living in Akron, Ohio. Her family was about 100 miles away. So I didn't see other women that wore stockings over hairy legs, for example, which my mother did. And she did all of that without any, by the time I was, say, in the 9th grade, I asked her about all this because I wanted to shave my legs. And she had the position that shaving your legs was really a brutal thing to do. Why would you put this sharp object next to your skin? And of course, that was the position she had grown up with. But it gave me then an option. I wasn't getting this thing about how you look or being thin, or she never, ever cared about anything along those lines at all. And I was a little outside of the realm then of the female appearance. And my mother was loud, and so was her sister. And they often told the men what to do. And her sister, who continued to work in a factory all of her life, swore like a soldier or a sailor or whatever. And so I was around these women who spoke directly and who did not look like, a model in a magazine. And I was a little bit at a loss about all of that until I went to college, and I got a chance to see then that it wasn't just being smart in school that was going to be the ticket. I had to look around and see how to dress. But it gave me a little bit of a space to look at what women were doing from a different perspective. And it wasn't, I think if I had grown up in Yugoslavia, which was what Slovenia was then, I probably would have seen a lot of women like her, but not in Akron at that time.
So did you shave your legs in 9th grade?
No, she wouldn't allow me. And by 10th grade, I think I threw a dramatic fit about it 1 or 2 times, and she kind of gave up on it. And really, I didn't understand why that was such a difficulty for her until I went to Europe, actually, and saw that there were a lot of women who weren't shaving in Europe. And then later, of course, there was sort of the grunge movement for women as well. My daughter got into grunge and didn't shave anything for quite a long time there at Oberlin College. So, but that issue about putting a sharp razor to my body was something that became, a question for me. And most women weren't facing that question.
Fascinating. Pally, your next book, please consider having it a biography, because you have a fascinating life.
Well, thank you. I don't know about that. It's a complicated life, isn't it, Katherine?
I've read several of your books, by the way, and this is really just up there and just one of the top books. It's so important and lovely.
Well, thank you. And I think this is probably, a good place to end. There are so many more things we could talk about, but I do hope that that this conversation, leads some women to think about their sovereignty and to think about what autonomy means, and then maybe to buy women and desire beyond wanting to be wanted, and to then think about how you do call in the one. If you're calling in the one, it might not be the right one, but it is really that decides. It's like it's not the other person who even decides.
So at the joke about those who've done calling in the one is very often, oh, I get that it was calling in myself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's
Well, it's like
one
you called.
from.
Well, it's like you called in the one and then you had to call back. You had to call yourself. Right? So, well, thank you so much. It's been a lovely conversation, and I look forward to seeing you again.
You too, Polly. Thank you.